correct me if I'm wrong, are there any changes in the song? Or does it just basically do the same thing for 5 minutes straight? I'm pretty sure it does the same thing.
I think it's 4 minutes.
It's 4 minutes and 57 seconds.
Hello and welcome to another episode of 1001 Album Complaints. It's the show where longtime friends, musicians, music critics, well, I should say people who are very critical of music, get together to discuss a randomly selected album from the book 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. Each week we take a new album, we beat it up, we look at it from a multitude of angles, give it a bit of a post-mortem, if you will, and then at the end we vote and let you know if you should spend your time listening to this album. This week we've been listening to an album called Mermaid Avenue by Billy Bragg and Wilco. Crazy enough, I didn't know this until recently, but there is, of course, another major player on this album who we'll talk about shortly. Now, before we get started, if you're a fan of what we're doing on this show, go ahead and sprinkle some of that hoodoo voodoo on the like and share buttons.
Well done, sir.
Or better yet, just tell your friends. All this stuff actually makes it really easy for people to, or easier rather, for new people to find the show. So let's go ahead and jump right in so you can get an idea of what we've been listening to all week. And introduce our cast of characters today. Go ahead and introduce yourself and give a tweet-length review of this album.
Hey, this is Rob here, and my tweet-length review of Mermaid Avenue is, I liked one or two aspects of this record. I won't say which aspects, but really what I want to say is half-baked ideas, revived and reinterpreted, remain half-baked.
Ooh, spicy.
Coming in hot.
All right, this is Tom. My tweet-length review, very short, very concise. It's just white people. In all honesty, I thought in my head that this was like an alternate timeline where the South won the Civil War. This is what popular music would sound like.
Hey everybody, this is Adam, and my quick tweet-length review is that regarding the entire idea for this album, to quote Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park, they were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Ooh.
That's a good one.
The Jurassic Park reference you didn't know you needed.
Yes.
Hold on to your butts, audience.
All right, this is going a lot different than I thought it was tonight. I feel like I'm going to be playing a little bit of defense, but this is Alan here. So my tweet-length review is, this album has all the ingredients of what should be a pretty terrible album. You've got kind of a gimmicky premise, this idea of trying to blend the old with the new, but much like Scrapple or Slim Jims, the end product is actually quite tasty.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, now that Tom's back in Delaware, I feel like, we have to do some strength in numbers here.
I went to a Scrapple festival in rural Pennsylvania about 10 years ago, and it was a fascinating experience where you actually learned and watched them make Scrapple, which before it actually becomes Scrapple, I think it's called like glop or mush or something, and then don't worry, it doesn't cook. It coagulates. So that's what you want from your meat products.
Adam,
Sorry, take it away, Alan.
I have a question for you here, Adam. How many of the people who attended that Scrapple festival do you think are dead of heart attacks by this point, 10 years on? It's got to be a pretty high percentage.
I think I'd agree with that.
Yeah, I was going to ask if you had to do a weigh-in before they allowed you to the festival. Funny enough, though, I think I would love that.
Yeah, it was tasty.
Yeah. Hey, man. Good shit. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this album, how it came together, a little bit of the backstory here. This record itself, Mermaid Avenue, was released in 1998, but its origins actually go way back as early as the 1940s. to American folk icon Woody Guthrie. So that's the part I actually didn't know. I've had this album sort of on my playlist for a few years. Didn't know it was a Woody Guthrie album. In fact, I thought some of the songs were just straight up Wilco songs, because I am a big fan of that group as well. But I think most people know who Woody Guthrie is. But for those who are not familiar, Woody Guthrie was I don't know how you would describe him, a folk singer, poet, political activist. Did a lot of his, most notable work in the 40s. This is also something I didn't know. His most well-known song by far is the song "This Land Is Your Land," which was written in 1940. I thought that was written in like the 1800s.
Yeah, same here. That's crazy. Okay.
It's actually kind of a subversive song, right? That song is meant to be a little bit on the sort of socialist side, and it's taken on this aura of classic Americana, but it's sort of saying, hey, this is supposed to be for everybody and not the people who have monopolized all the power and wealth.
How dare you anti-American. No.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's taken on, or it's meant to be in that sort of Born in the USA vein, where it comes off as this patriotic. It was actually a direct response to, I think, the way he said it was he was so tired of hearing people sing "God Bless America" all the time that he wanted to write something that was a little bit more of a response to that song. But I think the biggest thing about Woody Guthrie, and the reason he's such a big part of this, is because he is basically a direct inspiration for almost all of the singer-songwriter folk artists that most people like. So your Bob Dylans, your Jerry Garcias, Springsteen, Johnny Cash, you name it, like almost all of them trace their influences directly back to Woody Guthrie.
And he was out in the 40s? You said his heyday was in the 1940s?
That was so he wrote "This Land Is Your Land" in 1940. And well, he died in, I want to say in the 60s, 67 maybe. Okay. So, but he was writing this entire time, which we'll talk about in a moment. But
I was just going to say, yeah, he was very prolific, and I think he was known for being this writer during the Dust Bowl times, during the Depression times, writing about those struggles, kind of grapes of wrath, looking for work, moving from town to town kind of stuff. And I would say that I think it's fair to say he influenced any songwriter that has ever sought to use songwriting as a tool to send a deeper message, to send a political message, to send a message of revolution, something along those lines. So all those people you mentioned, of course, are in that category. But
well, that was a big criticism of Bob Dylan when he first started, right? I mean, maybe not necessarily criticism, but he repurposed a lot of Woody Guthrie stuff into songs that sometimes it was melody, sometimes it was words, and sort of would take this approach of trying to rehash some Woody Guthrie, maybe, like you said, Rob, half-baked ideas to much greater effect than was done on this album, by the way.
Oh, he was a huge fanboy of Woody Guthrie. I mean, he's Bob Dylan's number one hero.
Yeah, he's got that song for Woody is great. That's one of my favorite Bob Dylan songs.
Yeah, he was taking like publicity photos that looked like Woody's publicity photos and stuff. Like he really wanted to be.
Oh, okay. Fanboy number one.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Well, and interestingly enough, Woody even told Bob Dylan, or maybe it was someone in his orbit, that if you don't know what you're doing, steal something else that you like and kind of go from there. So it sounds like Dylan may have taken that, quite literally. So he was very politically inclined and politically charged, as we sort of talked about. He was most likely a socialist, communist, or he at least associated with a number of communist groups, which of course back in this time, especially growing up in Oklahoma, he was sort of this original Okie, these folks who, Rob, you mentioned Grapes of Wrath, who went to California to start a new life, which we'll talk about one of their songs here. But I think a lot of people associate him with his guitar that he wrote "This Machine Kills Fascists" on it. And that was sort of his big thing. He was very anti-fascist, which I guess, does that make him Antifa? I don't know.
Yeah. That is pretty badass thing to write on your guitar. And you draw that direct line up to Tom Morello, who has "Arm the Homeless" on his guitar, which is a great slogan.
Totally. So something else he was really known for, though, was he was a writing machine, right? So he wrote literally thousands of pages of lyrics, different manuscripts, musings, children's songs. I mean, he wrote and wrote and wrote, and a lot of that came after World War II when he was living on Mermaid Avenue on Coney Island, which hence the name of this album. So fast forward to 1995, Woody Guthrie's daughter, Nora Guthrie, reached out to an English singer-songwriter, Billy Bragg, and said, hey, I have this mountain of basically lyrics that Woody never put any music to. They're just kind of sitting in a box. I would love for you to reimagine these lyrics as something a bit more contemporary, so not trying to sound like Woody sounded or what the music sounded like back then, but kind of reimagine these lyrics for for modern times, right?
Did they have a choice? Was it like a box full of 1,000 pages of lyrics, or did the daughter just give them 13 and say, you have to work with these 13? Or did they have a choice in the lyrics?
No, well, I don't think she would have given him Hoodoo Voodoo if that were the case. But no, they did have a choice. I don't know if there was like what the filtering process was. So I don't know that she just said, hey, here's literally like thousands of pages. Although in watching parts of the documentary, which really only a few segments are available online, it does seem like they were just kind of going through it, grabbing things that they liked and kind of working through them that way. So I do think it was a bit of a kind of needle and haystack type of situation.
It's a cool idea. I mean, I really like the idea. I like the idea of musical challenges where you're given something and then asked to reproduce something. It's almost like Chopped, right? But with music. Like I had a challenge with a buddy of mine, and we were going to take songs and the melodies that are major and then try to overlay minor and diminished chords over them and see what you come up with, right? And so I like the idea of a challenge where here's some lyrics, see what you guys can do. Try to get a vibe from the story it's telling, and then, to your point, kind of reimagine that. Like, what would that sound like coming out of a modern day songwriter? So I appreciate the idea. I think it's pretty cool.
I like the concept of the challenge, but making a good album is challenging already. And so you're throwing another level of challenge on there that is just a barrier between you and a good end product.
And goodness.
One of my notes is that it sounds like they are having a great time making this album. I did not have a great time listening to this album, but it sounds like they were having a great time putting it together.
Let's get into that a little bit, and I think we can add on some more of the historical context here as far as how Wilco got involved in everything. But it seems like there's a quasi consensus that this album is lacking a lot. So I say more about that. I'm kind of curious, like general takes of this album.
I'll jump in because I think the problem I have with it is you guys talked about challenges. I'm for challenges. I'm for creative constraints. I'm for writing prompts. However, none of those speak to the issue of taking an artist's scraps, if you will, of presumably purposely unpublished material. I mean, we're not talking about putting the last 10% on a 90% done record. This isn't a Temple of the Dog situation, which I've always been led to believe was like songs that were written, the guy dies, and now Eddie Vedder and Chris Cornell are like, let's... Actually, I'm speaking out of turn. I don't really know how Temple of the Dog came about, but I am skeptical.
Well, I think of like the Wagon Wheel situation where Dylan actually wrote the hook for that song. Ultimately, it gets into, Old Crow Medicine Show, and they, put the finishing touches on it, essentially. I wonder if that's kind of similar to what you're referring to.
Yeah, perhaps. I think it's different when the artist is still alive, though. And Wagon Wheel is an interesting touchstone. I want to return to that because I think that is an important touchstone because I think it's kind of how traditional music works throughout history, which is to say that you have these shells of songs, or maybe even just a chorus or a refrain part, and then people kind of add verses to it over time in different versions. And I think some of this stuff dates back to, I think that's really common in like Irish traditional music, which is maybe the only version of traditional music I know somewhat intimately, like in songs like The Wild Rover and stuff. But I think that dates back to a time before recorded music, where you kind of had to interpret everything you got your hands on because you weren't listening to the definitive version of it on a record. But anyway, either way, I think that's distinct from the idea that the writer has passed on. Like, oh, hey, Picasso put a couple strokes of paint on this canvas. Do you want to go ahead and finish it off for him, Adam? I don't know. I'm just not sure if that's such a great idea overall.
Question on that note, not to rabbit hole this too much, if the lyrics were entirely coined by Billy Bragg and Wilco, so if this pretext didn't exist and they just got together and said, let's make an album, the song sounded exactly the same, lyrics were the same, would that change your opinion of the album?
I will say for me personally, my first several listens through, I had no idea that it wasn't just them writing these songs, and I didn't like it. And then I found out that it was Woody Guthrie, and I liked it a little bit more because of that, because I understood the constraints that they were working with. And also, there's something about Woody Guthrie's personality, viewpoint, approach, whatever you want to say, that lends some credence to or some heft to his point of view. It seems like a well-earned point of view, and I didn't get the sense that these guys were coming with that same well-earned point of view to this project.
It's like a greeting card. Hey, here's what someone else said when you give it to somebody.
Yeah, and then you say, I agree.
Yeah. This sentiment was really nice. I'll write my name at the bottom and give it to whoever.
I agree with Tom. The addition, which came a little later in my listening, of the Woody Guthrie aspect of this made it more palatable and more understandable. But even still, I think my problem with it is how inconsistent it is stylistically. There are certain styles on this record that I actually do quite like, and we could talk about them via the songs we picked. And if they represented kind of an average of the vibe of the record, I think I would find it much more palatable. But some of these songs are just, like, to me, embarrassingly bad. Again, it sounds like they're having a good time, as Tom mentioned, but I'm not. I'm not a part of this group. I'm not at this hootenanny.
That is a very good term for this album, hootenanny.
Yeah, I won't disagree with a lot of what is said. I will say I happen to really like this album. I think the songs are really good. There are some shit songs on here, without question. The biggest complaint I did have, and maybe you alluded to this, Rob, is in some ways it does feel like a compilation, because it kind of is, right? And one of the things that bothered me a little bit was it sometimes felt like they were just trading off songs. So it's like, all right, Billy Bragg, you have this song, Tweety does this song, back and forth. Same backing band, but I did feel like it lacked a little bit of that cohesion between songs.
Didn't seem like the two were talking to each other, like to try to stay in any way consistent. So it did feel like two albums that were completely, like, it didn't feel like they were actually collaborating very, very much.
For the uninitiated, Billy Bragg is the singer of Wilco and Tweety is the British guy?
Opposite.
Or the other way around. Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So Billy Bragg, and I've heard of him because of this album, and he's a somewhat well-known. He's actually a British singer-songwriter. The reason that he was sought out by Nora Guthrie was because he's been around since probably like the late 70s, I think. Sort of started in that like punk-ish aspect, was really into The Clash and bands like that. But his music has been very politically forward, very politically charged. So she felt like he was best positioned to carry out whatever was in this box full of letters, so to speak. And he agreed to take it on. But at the time, he was getting really into Wilco, who were essentially an alt-country band coming out of Chicago in the mid-90s. What's interesting, though, is at the time, they were only 2 albums into their career.
Right.
So I would have thought they were, and they're obviously I think it's safe to say they're a household name at this point. But they were, 2 albums in, so it wasn't like they would add a bunch of cred to this other than he really liked the way they played music. And so, and what's interesting is Jeff Tweedy, who he's the lead singer for Wilco, he was very ambivalent about the project. I think he was, which if you've seen interviews with him, he's a very, crabby's the wrong word, but he's a little bit aloof, and so him being ambivalent to it was not surprising. Who was really into it, though, was his main collaborator at the time, Jay Bennett, who actually, I think one of his old bands was named after a Billy Bragg song. So he was like all about it. And but also this guy, if you've seen the Wilco documentary about how they made Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, this guy Jay Bennett was a little bit of a control freak, was very insistent on mixing everything himself, even if there were better options, which actually led to a huge falling out after this album, where, you know, they come out with this album and they weren't even able to put together like a promotional tour or agree on like royalties or musician fees, because this guy Jay Bennett was so controlling about, you know, wanting to mix the album and all that. So, but ultimately that's why Wilco was brought in. And so they are essentially the backing band, you know, for this entire project, with Tweedy and Billy Bragg, you know, kind of trading off lead vocals.
And just for those who don't know Wilco as well, let's just to put a fine point on doubling down on what you just said, Alan, which this is pre any sincere Wilco fame. Just like you said, it's 2 albums in. I'm not nearly as familiar with. I'm relatively familiar with Wilco after Yankee Hotel Foxtrot, right? Which is now 20 years ago ish. So they've had a lot of output since then, and I'm less familiar with their very early stuff. But I have to say, they've always been labeled alt country, but I think of them as a little more of a rock band, almost experimental, like fuzzy rock. They're a very palatable version of that. Admittedly, I'm not saying they're avant-garde noise rock, far from it, but I've always thought the country label was a little odd for them, and I went and listened to their album that came out right before this just to kind of confirm it. But yeah, they're kind of noisy. They're kind of a distorted rock band. They don't sound like this.
Well, they hate the label. Jeff Tweedy loathes the label, and I think what was happening is, you know, the band that sort of spawned Wilco was this band called Uncle Tupelo. So they broke up and kind of formed 2 bands. One was a band called Sun Volt. The other was Wilco. And I think Uncle Tupelo had a lot more of that alt country vibe to it. And so that may have stuck with the band a little bit. But those first 2 albums, I do agree, they're nothing close to country. And I wonder if it was just critics trying to make sense of, hey, here's alternative music that just sounds a little bit more South, and was having a hard time categorizing it. I'm not sure, but certainly now Wilco is very, very much more of an experimental, you know, type of band.
When you're describing the sound, I would have used those same descriptors to describe Yo La Tengo, basically, which is kind of a little bit of experimental, kind of crunchy, a little bit of fuzzy, but also plays on a lot of different pools. They touch a lot of different genres.
That's not a terrible touchstone. Wilco is a little more songwritery than Yo La Tengo, but similar tones, I think, in some cases, and similar waters. Anyway, I'm a little biased because I do like Wilco's Yankee Hotel Foxtrot and beyond output, so I'll happily be a Wilco defender. And frankly, I think the Wilco-led songs, or the Jeff Tweedy-led songs on this, are the better tunes, the more palatable tunes to my ear. So I'm wary of this being an introduction for people to Wilco and maybe being a little turned off, because I think their output is pretty strong in the 2000s.
It's funny, when I first listened to this, I did not have the context that this was very early on in Wilco's career, and that Billy Bragg was the famous one, and Wilco were the sort of the people that were along for the ride, or sort of being blessed into this project. My initial note was, did Billy Bragg pull Jeff Tweedy out of a house fire or something like that, and he just owed him big, and that was why it happened? Because you know, you go back, clearly you look at him now and you're like, well, Wilco, like you said, kind of a household name. If you're into non-top 40 music, you know who Wilco is. Even if you don't like Wilco, which I don't particularly like Wilco, I still know who they are, and I've heard a lot of their stuff. I have no idea who Billy Bragg is, and all of our listeners in the UK can, you know, write 1001 album complaints at Gmail, tell us how stupid we are and how much we should be loving his earlier works.
Go eat some haggis, which I guess is the UK version of Scrapple.
Scrapple, yes.
I've had haggis. Scrapple is 1,000 times better.
Yeah, Tom and I dined on haggis together, in fact.
Yeah.
And we immediately commented that Scrapple was superior.
Superior.
It's your go-to disgusting Delaware meat. It's much better.
If you know, you know.
Right.
Well, this is actually a good segue. Speaking of Wilco and their, you know, the vibe they contribute.
This song's pretty good. If the entire album were sort of this on average, I would find it much easier to listen to and much easier to like. I don't think it's an exceptional song. I was thoroughly surprised that it's the most played song and considered sort of the hit on the album. That was surprising because a couple of the other tunes stood out to me more. I wonder if it's just because it has California in the title.
I was going to say that old Onion article where the Chili Peppers accidentally write a song about Oregon or whatever it was.
Yeah, my note is...
And so, yeah, you want a song, put California in a guaranteed hit.
My note on this was definitely, finally, a song longing for California. I really wish that more people did this.
Nights.
Yeah, come on.
I really love this song. I think this was the best song on the album, and it's actually become a kind of staple in Wilco's live set because, to me, I would say this song, if you do want an introduction to Wilco and you've never heard anything and you do listen to this album, I feel like this is very true to how they sounded, or at least how they sounded back, in some of those early albums.
Yeah, this is more or less what they sound. I agree with that sentiment. I just don't think it wasn't a standout track for me, but it does sound like them.
I will go a little confessional style here. I had a hard time listening to this album as many times as I listened to most of the albums that we do. So I'm going to need a little bit of a refresher on California Stars. Correct me if I'm wrong. Are there any changes in this song? Or does it just basically do the same thing for 5 minutes straight? I'm pretty sure it does the same thing.
I think it's 4 minutes.
It's 4 minutes and 57 seconds.
I think we can issue a global comment here that there are very few changes on this album. So we can just, I think, safely say the answer to your question is no, there are no changes.
I don't know if this is apocryphal or not, but we used to say amongst ourselves that some Woody Guthrie documentary had him saying, if you're playing more than 2 chords, you're showing off.
And if you listen to Woody Guthrie songs, they're like 97 seconds long. And they're great. They're great. He gets in, he gets out.
Didn't need to be 5 minutes. Alan, I'm kind of in the same boat with you. So I first listened through this album. I wanted to hate it. Just from the start of that Walt Whitman's Niece, and they had that big gang vocal doing the reply. I was like, oh, God, it's going to be one of those kind of albums. Then I got to California Stars. I was like, all right, I could dig on this. And it was not the most offensive album in the world. And I'm kind of a sucker for this kind of laid back country fried rock thing. So this fell somewhat into my wheelhouse a little bit. So I'll back you up there that
I like, to be clear, I like it too. Especially, I think the biggest problem I have with the album was, aforementioned Walt Whitman's Niece or Hoodoo Voodoo, which I think we're going to touch on. Like, how dare you start the album with this track?
God, that track was terrible. Also,
Walt Whitman. Banging Walt Whitman's Niece isn't, that doesn't feel like the best way to start a song.
Like, you couldn't have found another song that didn't say, I don't know which semen. I mean, that's the line. You say it like 4 times. I'm sorry. I know I'm being a teenager here, but it puts you off a little bit as the opening track. You're like, wait, what did he say?
Right. Like if you're going to do a call and response, that particularly is
right. No, but to take it back to what Tom said about them having a good time, the Walt Whitman's Niece and a couple of other tracks, but particularly the fact that they put that one first, it's presumptuous. And what I mean is it's presumptuous to put that song first on the album. It presumes that we're already all friends here, that we're already all having a grand time together, that we're getting drunk. Mm-hmm. It's like, actually, I just met you. I just hit play, man. Like, ease me into it a little bit.
Well, hold on. Okay, I'm not saying this is of the level of, I don't know, Appetite for Destruction, but like, do you feel like you need to be eased in with Welcome to the Jungle? That just hits you in the face right away. I'm not sure I see that as a legitimate
Welcome to the Jungle is a great song. It is a mission statement. This is not a great song. This is not a mission statement, except for in a negative way that we have taken these ideas and we have gotten them about 80% developed, and then we didn't develop them any farther, and we just are going to be super repetitive, and we're going to go on for longer than one needs to go on, and it will get monotonous by the end of the song. Like, if that's the mission statement they were trying to put out there, good mission statement. I don't think that's what they were trying to put out.
No, I think you're right there. I don't think that's the point I was making. What I'm saying is, whether you like the song or not, to start an album like this with something that's a little bit more rowdy, that might be a bar type song, I don't see what the problem with that is.
It's just a bad song.
I guess it shows who was in control, which is to say Billy Bragg. But yes, by the time California Stars comes up, you're like, yes, this is a breath of fresh air. I could listen to a whole album of this song, which I have because I've listened to Wilco's catalog.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think part of... We've talked about this many times before. So many complaints go away if it's just a strong song. Dumb premises, repetitiveness, poor mixing choices, all this stuff goes away if the song itself is very strong. And this just wasn't like Walt Whitman's Niece was not a strong song. California Stars is it's a good song. But it's almost one of those, you're digging yourself out of a hole already. I was so turned off by Walt Whitman's Niece that I get to California Stars, and unless it was like mind-blowingly awesome, I'm just like, you're not even back to normal for me. You're not even back to good.
You're not even back to
digging out of a hole. I agree. That's what I felt.
Right.
That's a good way to put it.
It's like when the bank charges you the overdraft fee and you're back to like negative $5. And like it's more than I had before, but it's still negative money.
Right. Damn it.
All right. Let's I think I know how we're going to feel.
Would probably have been more like a children's song almost, like a funny kind of like, hey, I'm making fun of myself kind of song. Not to say the serious version that they did on the album didn't work, but I kind of wanted to hear the Woody Guthrie like non-serious version of it.
It's a good point. That's another reason Bob Dylan was so inspired by him, right? Because neither of them have mellifluous voices necessarily. But I have to mention, because I don't think any of the other songs we put on this focus list hit this point, but Natalie Merchant really helps this one along, and I thought her tunes sounded great.
Yeah. So I dug the way this song built. Echoing Rob's point about really liking it. Yeah, this was a great tune. At the 1 minute mark, the accordion comes in along with Natalie Merchant's vocal, which is very nice as it builds throughout. I love the addition. I don't know if it's an 808 or a cannon, but there's some like boosh, which is a little out of place, but I liked it. It was very cool. I'm picturing them in the studio throwing down that 808 bass.
You know what I really felt? I really felt like I already knew the song the first time I heard it. And I actually searched online and said, oh, did I hear this in a TV show or something? Like, this melody sounded remarkably familiar to me. And even the lyrics sounded remarkably. But I wasn't able to locate any rationale for that other than that it's well constructed.
You know what it might be? Natalie Merchant has a really recognizable voice. I feel like I didn't know that it was Natalie Merchant, but as soon as I found, I was like, oh, I know this voice. I know this singer. I have to find out who this is. And so that might have made it seem very familiar. She just has a voice that for some reason is just in there.
She does have a very distinct voice. And it's funny that Courtney and I were listening to this album on a road trip the other day, and you know, she's a big music fan, but I don't think she knows, I don't think she's able to suss out who's singing what in most songs. But even she was like, oh, that sounds like Natalie Merchant singing those background vocals. So yeah, I agree. I do think she's a little bit underutilized on this song, so I was really glad to see that she got her own tune.
She got her own, yeah. Yep.
There is I don't know if it's Conan or it's one of the late shows that was going on back in the late 90s where they actually do this song, and they bring her in to do it, which is great. But I feel like to bring her in to just sit there and sing a few harmonies, to me, is not like leveraging her to the most.
Well, maybe for those not steeped in 90s lore, we should probably mention that Natalie Merchant of 10,000 Maniacs fame, right? What was their
Because
big
the
hit?
night belongs to lovers. Because
you know who wrote that one, Tom? Your favorite. Springsteen, baby.
Oh, Springsteen. Oh, yeah. Listen, I don't dislike Bruce Springsteen. Let's stop with this hate campaign here.
What was the other song she had? Yeah, it's called Na Na Na.
You got it. Anyway.
Yeah. I also really like this song too. This was definitely a super catchy song. This was, I will say, for all the shit we're talking about Billy Bragg, I felt like this was the song where I sort of stopped and took notice and said, oh shit, like I think he really has a great distinct voice. I'm not familiar with virtually any of his other catalogs, so I don't know if that is consistent throughout his music, but at least in this song, I took notice that he's got a very authoritative, just a very strong, robust voice, I thought.
I would agree with that. He sounds really good on the low end.
And he didn't do any spoken word parts in this, which I like, because that spoken word part on that opening track, oh God. Again, another
Leaves have grasped my ass. If we're going to levy any criticism of this particular song, and it's relatively minor, but I feel, Rob, you mentioned earlier that it sounded like the two different sides of this collaborative project, Wilco and Billy Bragg, weren't talking to each other. When you got to the end and Natalie Merchant starts singing and diverging from the normal harmony that they're doing, it sounded like these were just very disparate takes. I could not picture the two of them sitting in a room and doing this at the same time and feeling like that would have been the natural way to go about it. It sounded like she probably came in and did a take, and he did a take, and they were never in the same room together. And that, again, it's not a huge criticism, but I do feel like towards the end of the song, I would have liked a little bit more of I'm going to throw out, you guys know I love Carole King. She has that live at Carnegie Hall, which if you have not listened to Carole King live at Carnegie Hall, everybody do yourself a favor, listen to that. Towards the end of that performance... After you listen to this, yes. Towards the end of that performance, she brings James Taylor out, and they do a bunch of songs. There's like a medley that they do of a bunch of songs Carole King wrote that other people did, like Up on the Roof and Some Kind of Wonderful and stuff like that. It's really fantastic, but the way that the two of them are singing together, it is so obvious that they are playing off of each other. And they're not necessarily hitting even the best notes all the time, but they are so simpatico in their thinking of what they're trying to do there. And I did not get that sense between Billy Bragg and Natalie Merchant when they diverged from the thing that they wrote that was a really great harmony. And then they started improvising and doing all these other things, and it seemed a little disjointed to me. Again, I still like it. Still the best song on the album, but it was...
I think it's called A Man in the Sand, if you're interested. By the way, the only way you can access this documentary, which is criminal at this point, is to buy a physical DVD. Any knowledge of what the other person was going to do. And then they all would just say, okay, I like this version better. I like this version better. And so it did have a little bit of that piecemeal kind of feel where it's like, let's sort of like auction off this one's the best, this one's the best. And I think it does translate to some of that disconnect from song to song. Okay.
Listeners, you're not privy to this call that we're on, but I think 3 out of the 4 people on this call just started shaking their head when he said hoodoo voodoo. Nope.
Well, it's so interesting because there's an actual version that you can hear online of Woody Guthrie, and it is patently obvious that he's just doing stream of consciousness, just making silly noises and finding a word that rhymes with blah, 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 and just a couple of chords. Back to that point of like a half-baked song, to take that and to think, man, he was really on to something. He wasn't just screwing around. These are really...
It sounds like a kid's song.
Yeah, frankly. I thought the Wiggles had slipped into my Spotify history. You're telling me Chunk a Chunky Choo Choo wasn't poured over?
Dude, man, you just can't handle interpretive art.
But that is part of Woody Guthrie's charm, though, is that he can go from writing super serious stuff. What's the song he has about a car where he's like making car sounds as it's ridiculous, and he leans into the ridiculousness. But this came off as serious. Like they're like, oh yes, we're
gonna write a rockabilly tune and really,
Yeah, this song is horrible. Like I for as much as I do like this album, this song was almost enough to hit the brakes on listening to the rest of the track. I agree, Adam. I'm glad you brought up the demo that somebody uncovered, which incidentally was uncovered at the Shel Silverstein archive. So I don't know what the connection is there, but having some goofy ass song lyrics kind of checks out there. But yeah, it really sounds like a children's song that is just total nonsense. What's funny, this is another song though that has become a really popular Wilco song, and it's actually one of the songs they encore with a lot. And so
Wow.
I feel like I'd be a little bit salty if I went and saw Wilco and they encored the song, because it's just nonsense.
Well, it sounds like what's the vocalist name? Tweety Bird?
Jeff Tweedy.
Jeff Tweedy. It sounds like he did 10 gigs in a row, or like a triple in a single day, and then gargled with razor blades and just thought, you know what? I should go into the studio now and try to do this song. I mean, I understand they were trying to maybe think like, let's do this. Let's get a raw take where I'm really pushing myself. But he's just cracking. There's a point where like his voice actually stops and it's just a whistle noise because he's cracking so hard.
Keep in mind, he was so young. I feel like now he's got a little elder statesman of rock kind of vibe. But you watch these videos, he's such a young guy.
That's a great point. If you look at him now, you're like, I can see that. But then from this documentary, they're also chain smoking throughout the clips that I saw. So
that was your chance to reuse Mellifluous. You missed it.
I need a thesaurus here. We should have a segment that's like Rob's vocabulary.
You majored in English. You don't know what mellifluous means? Mellifluous?
Did you took those English classes? Do you think you actually learned shit?
I didn't go to those classes. Come on.
That's why I became an English major, was you could read part of the book and choose to just write about that, and you didn't actually have to know
as John Mulaney said, you major in English so that you can go, I think Emily Dickinson was a lesbian, and they're like, partial credit. Listen, it barely works when CCR says hoodoo, voodoo type of bullshit in their like totally fake swamp songs, because they were El Cerrito, California swamp songs. It barely works for CCR. It definitely does not work for Billy Bragg and Wilco.
Yeah, no, they're from the bayou, man. Come on, don't mislead our audience.
They're
here.
Born on the very affluent Berkeley Hills.
Yeah, right. El Cerrito is not the bayou. Like maybe Lodi is considered bayou, but no.
Funny CCR story. They played. This is probably going back to like '98. They played at Frawley Stadium in Wilmington, which is like a minor league single A baseball stadium. Incidentally, Wilco played there actually 20 years later. But anyway, it was Creedence Clearwater revisited, so non-Fogerty. Not only that, the drummer, it was a fill-in, so the drummer couldn't even make it. So people were going to basically see a CCR cover band because all you were getting was the bass player.
Yeah.
I hope you like the Doobie Brothers, because we got one of them.
Meanwhile, Corduroy's playing down the street for like $3.
Right.
All right. Let's take a listen to the next.
That's what I have to say for this song. It's not that sad. It's not that lonely.
I'm a sucker for this type of tune. This had that late 90s Wallflowers, slow, steady drive, Hammond, piano, guitar. I dug this tune. Not my favorite, but maybe second favorite on the album. This is the one that I went back to and was actually happy that it was on the focus list, which we all listen to a ton. So
I agree.
I like this song a lot too. Yeah,
I agree with that. It was my favorite of the Wilco-led songs, so maybe my second favorite on the album. And it sounds like a full idea is one of the reasons. I think it maybe had the best lyrics on the record to my mind. It sounded like a full song piece. It had parts to it. I don't know. I like the little dueling acoustic picking part that they threw in there. That's maybe my favorite, because I think Way Down Yonder stuck with me more. But maybe this is the most likely to get a replay.
I gotta tell you, I'm kind of shocked. This did not do it for me at all. My note on this is the one note that I was able to put together for this song, was that I feel like I'm drinking a room temperature glass of tap water while eating a slice of Wonder Bread. It was so nothing. It was so just down the middle of the road, nothing for me. And
that's lunch for our friend John.
Well, of course, yes. Condiments are a luxury. I understand that. But
I hear that. I actually had. It's funny that you like the lyrics, Rob. I had that. I thought they were a bit pedestrian. I do think they sound really nice in the context of the song, but if you just look at a lyric sheet, it looks a little bit like freshman poetry. But the harmonies were really sweet. I thought the oohs and ahs were, as lame as that sounds, it's very easy to misplace or overuse those elements. But I thought they were really well placed. Yeah. It also felt like a lot of what I like about Wilco was that they can take these really simple songs with just a few chords, and they're able to breathe this life into them that I think is hard to do. It also made me think of, this is a weird comparison, but when we did that Green Day album, a few months back, we talked about how they were really good at working in this box, right? So they had a box, but within that box, they really crushed it. And I think Wilco does, something similar, where it's very simple music, but they're able to add a lot to it.
I had a couple production notes, which is, hang on. Yeah, so they do something nice at the beginning. So you've got these kind of dueling acoustic guitars, and there's a volume swell. Like, actually on the mixing board, they raise the volume at the 13-second mark when it comes in, and it's nice. It kind of envelops you as a listener, which I dug. And then also at the breakdown, the acoustic guitar with the Hammond. The Hammond is riding just the upper drawbars, which for the listeners is, there's not a whole lot of low end. It's mostly the overtones and the upper registers. And that mix with the acoustic guitar is just super tasty. I just totally dig that mix of organ and acoustic guitar.
I feel like a Hammond is like red meat for Adam.
Oh my God.
You can take Netta Cherry, throw some Hammond in there. And
if you listen to the new ICP album, it's slathered in Hammond.
System of a Down. I'm going to start overdubbing that album with Hammond and see how it sounds.
Maybe in 70 years, someone will find some System of a Down lyrics just sitting in a box, ready for some Hammond.
Some real gems in there, I'm sure.
Let's move on to the final song that we're going to talk about today.
Farming.
I was going to say of Bruce Springsteen writing a farming song.
At least Bruce Springsteen would have
Farming can be thrilling if you really think about it.
I actually thought it had some Elvis Costello first album, My Aim Is True energy, but by that I mean the lamest songs on that record, like Sneaky Feelings, which I assume only Tom knows what I'm talking about.
I do know what you're talking about, which is not that bad of a song. It's better than this song.
It's not that bad, yeah.
I like this. I feel like I'm going to get booted off this podcast. I thought this was a really good song. Like I felt like it was like the energy peak of the album, and yeah, I don't know. I thought it was cool. I thought it was a memorable song. I thought it was, Rob, to your point, maybe at this point in the album was the right time for the rowdy gang vocals, type of song. So I don't know.
Sure.
I thought it was cool.
It wasn't as offensive as the other ones of its ilk, but I have to say I just don't like this genre that much.
What would you call this genre? It's kind of like a
Shitty the Band.
Shitty the Band.
Yeah, it is.
That's pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it's like a shitty version of the Band. Yeah,
the Band is a good comp for this. I agree.
Yeah.
Lyrically speaking, when I first heard it, I was like, oh, is this some, well, back to the Band, I was like, is this some kind of Civil War song? Is this about like the Union? But I think it's about unions.
Like labor unions as opposed to Union Army?
Yeah, like I planted a seed for the song. I'm a union fighting against, my corporate overlords. I think that's the metaphor that they were going for, but it's hard to know what he was thinking here.
Yeah, that's Lisa Simpson singing the Union fight song on the on the front lines of the strike outside of the power plant. What's the song that she sings there? We'll have to come back to this, dear listeners, but it's in there somewhere.
I'm sure you will all write in
and
let us know.
Yeah.
So we anticipate the flood of responses.
But that was a thing back in the day, is you would have people singing on the strike line protest songs against the corporate overlords and pro-union songs. So maybe that's what he was talking about here. But again, is that exact, like, if you were singing a protest song on the strike line, you wouldn't be like, yeah, woohoo, all right, yeah, we're all singing it together,
let's party.
Yeah, I don't know. This song, I don't know why I didn't like so many of the songs on here. I feel like it had the makings of something I could like, but it just never came together. And a lot of these ideas just seemed half-baked. And I liked 30 seconds into the song. He does that little slowdown. That was cool. And then right back into just
Right. Da, 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 da.
and then just
Yeah.
hammer,
That's cool.
hammer, same damn concept down your throat for the rest of the song.
Well, I think the point of all this, listeners, is you don't have to know why you like or don't like something. So
Wait, why are they listening to us then?
Yeah, I was gonna say that's why I felt kind of bad. I'm
never
supposed
mind.
to be having cogent arguments as to why I like or dislike these things, and some of the times I just don't know. It just doesn't. It didn't strike the right tonal vibe in terms of the tone of the delivery versus what I think was the intent of the tone when it was written. We talked about it on way over yonder in the minor key. Talked about it a little bit in Hoodoo Voodoo. We talked, and I'll talk about it again in this song. I think that if you were to ask Woody Guthrie, he'd be like, "That's not what I was going for at all. That's not the vibe I was going for at all. It should have sounded way different."
Yeah, but
I'm okay with that, though.
that's not really. Yeah.
You can be okay with it, but
Well, what I'm saying is, I think writing something that may not have been the original intent is not a detriment, unless the song sucks, which
it
sounds
does.
like is what we're saying
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
I like it, but I'll cede to the group here.
no, you don't need to. You stand by. You can stick to your guns and say that you think that I am wrong personally, but
As he often is.
Well, that doesn't need to be said. Yeah, I mean that's just
as I
implied.
often am,
I don't-
as I often am, yes, I am
implied.
very often wrong, but I will stick to my guns when I am wrong to the death. But this song is just not good. It's just not interesting. I don't find it interesting. I'm sorry.
Never has a truer statement been made.
I will fight till the bitter end, even if I'm wrong. It's gonna be on Tom's,
Especially if I'm wrong.
headstone.
Especially if I'm wrong.
Arguing indefensible points. All right. Well, I think I'm gonna say the moment of truth is here, but I think the momentum has been, or the suspense has been pulled out of this one. But for exercise sake, let's go around the horn and give our vote on whether you must listen to this album before you die.
For me, it's a no. This is Rob here. I haven't been convinced that this is essential. It didn't bother me that much. It was a nice enough record. I would have cut some songs from the track list. I think it would have gotten a lot stronger if you knocked it from around 50 minutes down to around 35 minutes. And in general, the embarrassing songs just stood out to me more than the high quality songs. I think that's ultimately my problem with it. So I don't think it really justifies its runtime is sort of the biggest thing. And if I want this kind of music, I feel like I have plenty of other Wilco material to draw from. That's the stuff I'm drawn to. So I'll go with the other Wilco records.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with a no on this one as well. Very cool concept. Sounds like a super fun time. Sounds like a fun concept I would have loved to have been a part of. The final product, I'm sure they like it. I'm sure they loved having done it. I don't need to be a party to that. I don't need to listen to it. It's pretty disposable. Again, not offensive. It's not the worst album that we've listened to by far. I wouldn't compare it to 461 Ocean Boulevard or anything like that. But it's just essential. No, definitely not.
So I know I crapped on this album a decent amount, but I actually didn't mind this one. I liked a handful of the tunes. In fact, I added California Stars and Way Over in the Minor Key to my list of the 10,000 songs that just go through random on my playlist on Spotify. So it was a decent album. I don't think it quite rises to the level of the must-hear 1001. To echo Tom's point, very cool concept. It's not even that I think they did a bad job at it. I just don't think it reaches the level of something that is life-changing or you absolutely need to hear. So it is a no for me, even though I dug it.
All right. Well, hey, I'm going to be the lone voice of reason here. No, I do think it's a yes. I agree that Wilco definitely has better material than this. I don't know much about Billy Bragg. I'm almost certain if he's been around as long as he has and was asked to do this, he's got better material than this. But for me, it does check a lot of boxes that I look for when sort of signing off on an album that you should listen to. I do think it's a neat story with some historical significance. One of the things I found interesting was Billy Bragg, when they set about this project, he said his goal for the album was, I would like at the end of this that Woody Guthrie begins to be recognized as one of the greatest American lyrical poets of the century. And I do think this album went a long way in bringing his music and what he brought back into the forefront. So I do think it was a bit of a project that worked in that sense. I think the musicianship is really solid on this. I think they do a lot with pretty simple chord structures, and I do think they add a lot of variety, even if the songs are not fully formed. It's a kind of album that I would play often and would recommend, and I think it sounds fairly novel. So, other than my complaint that it does have a bit of a compilation type of feel, but I think that's just the nature of an album like this where, it's sort of a one and done type of situation. So I do think it's a yes. So it doesn't matter, though. I've been thoroughly steamrolled here. All right. Well, I'm sorry, Wilco. Your legions of fans will have to be a bit disappointed at this, but it's a no for you all, I must say.
Settle down, dads.
Yeah. Has anyone ever seen that? There's a video that Jerry Cantrell does where it's this like dad band in a garage, and there's this one guy who looks like kind of all of us. He's like, "Hey, when are we gonna play some Wilco?" And he just says that like over and over again. So yeah, it's very, very dad rock here. Okay, to cleanse our palate a bit here, let's set our sights to next week and figure out what we will spend our week listening to. Tom, what do you got for us?
All right, thank you, Alan. We're going to bust out the old Albinator here. I had to pack it to ship across the country. Hopefully the gears haven't gotten discombobulated and we'll be able to get a clean spin on it. So, without any further ado, drum roll please. Next week we will be listening to... The album is Melodrama by the artist Lorde. With an E. With an E. This...
That might be the most, I'm looking, that's a 2017. Is that the youngest or most recent?
So I think this is a post-book publication revision of the list album, a later edition.
I didn't realize you did the software updates for the Albinator. That's
impressive.
Bringing in the new shit.
Dude, I got the new set of punch cards in the mail that I put in there.
Nice. I have no idea who this person or band is, so this should be...
She had a big hit, but it doesn't look like it's on this particular record. So.
Huh.
What was the hit?
Royals was her hit. She's from New Zealand or something?
Jesus, Royals has 921 million listens.
It's all bots.
On Spotify.
Bots. Elon Musk would say that it's 90% bots.
Yes, right. I also am trying to get out of some agreed upon deal here, which is doing this album next week. So.
After trying to artificially deflate the price of said album. I know he's listening.
It's getting political.
Yeah.
Is that political though? Okay. Well, yeah, I don't really know what to say about this album other than I am approaching it with an open mind, and if it has that many listens, it must be decent.
Nothing Terrible has a lot of people listening to it now.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell am I talking about. That's a direct contradiction to everything I stand for.
If that many people have listened to it, it certainly means that many people.
Maybe it's just one person that listened to it 90 million times.
921 million.
All right. Well, exciting week ahead. Well, folks, with that, I am Alan.
I'm Rob.
I'm Tom.
And I'm Adam.
Boosh.